Thanks for joining me. This is Danny, and welcome back to my modded 1.12.2 series. Today we are going to be making a big turbine with the Extreme Reactors mod. So in this room, I have a big, huge hole in the floor, which is where we're going to put a turbine, and this is going to be the largest turbine that we can make. Ultimately, we're going to end up making multiple of these turbines because we're going to be producing more steam than one turbine can produce, or than one turbine can use. I've got all the ingredients listed that we are going to need for this on this little clipboard. So this is what we're going to need. I've got 2 pages in order to make a 9x9x12 turbine. So the internal dimension is going to be 7x7x11. And like I said, this is going to be the largest possible turbine that you can make as far as like the amount of steam that it can consume. So turbines are limited to being able to use 2,000 millibuckets per tick of steam, and this size turbine will use exactly that much, and we're going to be generating the maximum amount of RF that you can generate with 2,000 millibuckets per tick. And right now we've got a extreme reactor set up here that's just passively cooled, which means that it's not producing steam, it is just producing RF or forge energy. I'm going to turn this thing on. We don't really need the power right now, so it's just going to be wasting power, but just so that we can see how much we are currently producing. So when this thing gets fully heated, you will see that it is producing about, I think it was around 12 at maximum, 11 or 12 kilo RF per tick, and we're using 0.168 millibuckets of fuel per tick. So it's already pretty efficient, but we're going to crank this up way more than that, and we're going to use a lot less fuel per tick once we create just this first turbine, and we're going to create multiple turbines. What we're going to need is a total of 360 blocks for the frame, and that frame is going to consist of one controller, so similar to the reactor where we had one controller block. We're also going to need 2 fluid ports and a power port we're going to be pulling the power from, obviously. And then the rest is all going to be turbine frames and turbine glass, so similar to the reactor. We're also going to have to make some changes to the reactor, because right now the reactor has a power output port, and we want it to output steam rather than RF. We're also going to have to be pumping water into the reactor, and then it's going to, instead of producing RF, it's going to heat up the water and produce steam, which we're then going to be putting into our turbine. And then that's going to be the frame, and then inside the turbine we're going to have basically a rotor that spins a bunch of blades. So we're going to have one rotor bearing, technically that's part of the frame, so it's one of the 360 blocks, and we're going to need 80 blades. So like I said, 2,000 steam is the maximum that it can process. Each blade processes 25 millibuckets of steam, and the more blades we have, the faster it can spin. And the faster it can spin, the more RF we can produce. It's a little more complicated than that, but we'll get into that in a second. So 80 blades, we'll be able to process exactly 2,000 RF per tick, or 2,000 millibuckets per tick of steam. We're going to need 11 shafts that we're going to be sticking the blades on. So we'll have an 11 block long shaft, and then the blades will be attached to that shaft. And then we're going to need some kind of a block to basically conduct electricity from the spinning shaft. So we're going to surround part of the shaft with lutecrite blocks. Now there's a lot of different blocks that you can use, and you can check the ftbwiki.org or other similar places to find out what blocks give you different things. Lutecrite is going to give us the most of everything. So we're going to get the most RF per tick from lutecrite. You can also use things like iridium. You can even use iron, and each different materials have a different amounts of drag, which means that they're going to slow the turbine down. The more drag it has, the more it's going to slow the turbine down. And then it's going to, in the process of slowing it down, it's going to be generating electricity. So lutecrite's going to give us the most. So we're going to be creating a whole bunch of that. This is going to be pretty expensive. So like in the last episode, we did set up a couple of automation systems so that we could get lots of Enderium, lots of ender pearls in order to make Enderium and blaze rods, and that's how we're going to make these. You can also make them just with ender pearls and emeralds, but we're going to do this because we have those materials available, and then of course nether stars. So let's get crafting. I'm gonna do most of the crafting off camera, but I'll kind of I'll check in with you to show you like what the material costs of all this stuff is going to be. Okay, so first of all, we're gonna do the Ludicrite since that's gonna be the most expensive and possibly the most time consuming. So I want to get this started right away. Oh boy. Okay, well it's only letting me craft 28. There's some kind of a overflow here or something, but we need 32, so I'm gonna just do 2 of them, one of 28 and one of 4. But you can see we need 1,136 sand. We need 56 blocks of Enderium. It's going to be a stack of Enderium. 126 buckets of Resonant Ender. So more than that. A bunch of Cyanite we're going to be using to craft, or a bunch of Plutonium we're going to be using to craft Cyanite. Cyanite is usually a byproduct of the reactor, but we haven't been running it long enough. We only have 12, so whatever. That's what we got. So I'm going to let those craft, and then I'm just going to do another set of 4. And here we go. So it's actually crafting a bunch of sand right now in the pulverizer because we don't have any sand in the system. So we're actually going to need about 375 of these turbine housings because we need some of those to craft some of the other blocks that we need. And then we're also going to use some as the frame, and some of them are going to turn into glass. And this is what we're going to need. 271 redstone torches, a bunch of comparators. We're going to need a bunch of housing cores, graphite. This is basically coal smelted. And 271 redstone, a bunch of stone, a bunch of iron, a bunch of gold, and a little bit of nether quartz. And that's the coal for the graphite. And a lot of sticks. So there we go. Those are in progress. And we're going to need... how many shafts did I say? 11 shafts? So that's this stuff. And 1 rotor bearing. We'll actually make that manually. Oh, and the blades. We're going to need 80 blades. So let's get that started. Okay, looks like we have everything for that. And then 1 rotor bearing. It's going to use some of these turbine housings. Got a bunch of turbine housings being crafted, so there's a controller, and we're going to need a flux power tap, not the Tesla power tap because we are not using Tesla, we are using RF. We're going to need 2 fluid ports. One of them we're going to be using to pull the steam in. The other we're going to use to pull the water out, because after the turbine uses the steam to turn the rotors, it then ends up becoming water, and then we can put that water back into the reactor. So while I'm waiting for that stuff to craft, I'm going to build the frame of the turbine housing out of, well, turbine housing blocks. I think what I'm going to do is I'm probably going to do the whole thing out of turbine housing blocks except the top and the bottom. Like I said, I plan on stacking them, so I want to be able to look down. I want glass on the top so that I can look down and see all the turbines down there. At the very least, we do need to have the frame itself made out of these. Okay, so I used XNet and the player interface to always keep a stack of turbine housing blocks in that slot. So like if I get rid of some, it just keeps filling them back up. So that way we can build without having to fill up our whole inventory with turbine blocks. And it's pulling them right from our RS system. So I can just use my wand. Oh, actually, let's go from, yeah. Oh, look at that. So while I'm waiting for more of that to craft, I'm going to put the rotor bearing down here on the bottom. And then on top of that, or connected to the bearing, we're going to put all the shafts, actually, if they're ready. Rotor, yes, we have our 11 shafts, and we have our 80 blades. The shafts do emit light. Machine is too small. What? Okay, so that ends up going all the way from the bottom to top. You can have these going 3. Wait, why are those? They're facing the wrong way, but I think that will be fixed. once it becomes a multi-block. There. Oh, actually this so they do have to be attached to the center, although they don't all have to be the same size. So like, okay, so I'm gonna put all the controlling stuff here. So we'll put our turbine controller there, and we'll pull the power maybe on this side because that's kind of where our power stuff is, and then our fluid ports. I guess we'll put those on this side as well because our reactor is right above us, so that'll make it easy for us to pipe the water back in, or the water and steam. I kind of want to do this somewhat symmetrically. So one of them is going to be import or input, and then the other is going to be an output. I did make a small calculation error in my dimensions. I said 9 by 9 by 12, which is 7 by 7 by 11 internal dimension. That's not going to give us a 7 by 7 by 11. That's going to give us a 7 by 7 by 10. So we're going to actually make a 9 by 9 by 13. And we do need a few more of these casing or housing blocks than I thought too. So this whole bottom row actually has to go down one block. Oh, actually those can stay there. Okay, so the structure is almost complete. One piece of glass there, and then we actually do need a housing up here. We can't put a glass. And then you can see it became a multi-block structure. Hooray! So now we can click on here and we get lots of stuff. Okay, so I had to craft the Extreme Reactors wrench in order to reverse this. You used to be able to just do it with a bare hand, so I don't know. Or just any wrench, but in this case, it looks like I needed the Extreme Reactors wrench. So we can turn that to output and then this to input. So water goes in, steam goes in, water comes out. And then, so in these tanks, we'll have steam in this tank, and then we'll have water in that tank. And you can see we can also increase or decrease the amount of steam that we allow in. So we could use that to regulate our speed, because there are optimal speeds. This particular setup should be optimized at the maximum at 2000. I'm still waiting for a little bit of ludicrite to craft. I ran out of nickel. I forgot. I mean, I ran out of platinum. I didn't have auto processing for nickel to give me platinum, so yeah. So it's in the process right now. So we're going to put, each one of these blocks is going to give us a certain amount of, it's going to add a certain amount of drag, and it's also going to give us a certain amount of RF. All right, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32. Hooray! So that's it. That's the whole thing right there. Now we just got to get our inputs and outputs. Why did that not multi-block? Can always click on this to see. Rotor blades must be placed closer to the rotor bearing than all other parts inside a turbine. Oh, okay. I see what I did wrong here. This block needs to be a rotor bearing. The rotor bearing needs to be on the side of the blades, and then on the oh boy. On the bottom, instead of this turbine, instead of the bearing here, we want a housing there. Okay. And then the rotor bearing goes right here against the blades. Of course, we could reverse this. We could have the ludicrite blocks on the top and the blades on the bottom, and have the rotor bearing down there. But now, when I put this block here, we should get a multi-block. Yay! Nice. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take our, oh boy, we're going to take our reactor apart, which means we're going to end up spilling Inderium everywhere and making a big mess. Oh, actually, you know what I can do? I can swap it. Yeah. There we go. So I'm going to take my swapping wand. I'm going to shift right click on a reactor casing, and I'm going to go like that. Yeah, there we go. Now we need 2 reactor coolant ports. I'm actually going to put the cooling ports down here. So again, I'm going to set one in the world so that I can set my swapping wand. And I'm going to pick it up, and we'll put one right there and one right there. So it'll be right by these guys. And then one of them is going to be outputting. So we're going to grab our Extreme Reactors wrench, which is in our morphing tool. So that one's outputting, this one's inputting. This one is inputting, that one's, I mean, this one's outputting and that one's inputting. So we're going to be putting water in here and we're pulling steam out there. And we're going to have to be able to do 2,000 millibuckets per tick. So we're going to need some pretty fast pipes here. And then we're going to need to have a source of water to get things started. Once we get this thing filled, oh, actually now if we put our reactor back together with this, we'll now see if we look in here that, well, we still have the energy buffer. That's interesting. But we now have a coolant fluid tank and a hot fluid tank. So we need to get this guy filled up with water. And then it's going to produce steam, and then that steam is going to get piped out and then piped into this guy. I've got everything set up here. So I'm using the superlaminar flux ducts from thermodynamics. These are really the only pipes in this pack that are fast enough to handle the throughput, I'm pretty sure. You don't want servos on these, because the cooling port is going to be pushing into the flux duct. Superlaminar flux ducts actually have an unlimited throughput. As long as they're pressurized, meaning as long as you're not pulling fluids faster than you're pushing them. If you put a servo on there, it's going to limit how much it's going to be able to pull. So let the port push into the pipe, and then it'll just end up going into here. We do need a servo on the water source, although it's really only going to pull from the water source in the beginning, and then once it has enough water, it's just going to circulate between the two. So I've got a resonant servo on there. It doesn't really matter. I could have just used the regular cheap servo and it would have worked just fine. But then once this starts running, it's going to be pulling water from here, or actually water is going to be pushing. That's the key with the super laminar flux fluid ducts, is you have to be pushing water into it, or pushing the fluid or the steam or whatever into it. You don't want to be pulling, because that'll slow you down. So we can turn our turbine on and turn our reactor on, and we should see that we are producing we end up leveling off at exactly 2,000 millibuckets per tick. And if we look down here, we'll see that our steam should be holding at about the middle, and we're outputting the water fast enough. And our rotor is gaining speed. Right now the coils are disengaged, which is going to allow the coils to speed up faster, or the rotors to speed up faster. Once we engage the coils, it's going to slow down the acceleration a little bit, but then we're actually going to start producing RF. So right now we're producing 2.5K RF per tick. We're going to be producing a lot more than that once this gets up to about 2,000 RPM. And this guy is, I have the fuel rods in 70%. We can actually put those in a little bit more. So we're only actually running about 20% at 20% capacity right now in order to produce. We're still producing 2,000 millibuckets per tick. So we can actually push those in even more. We can have, this reactor is going to be enough to run probably like 4, maybe 5 turbines. And each of those turbines is going to be producing quite a bit of RF per tick. So right now we're at 620. This would be the low RPM. When we see the green, that means that we're at an optimal RPM. So if we engage the coils right now, we're going to be producing a lot more RF than we were before. We're at 8K RF per tick currently. I'm going to disengage because I want it to get even faster still. And this guy, okay, so we're now actually only producing 1,600. So I'm going to pull out, oops, one rod at a time until we balance out at 2,000, because the further in you do the control rod, the less fuel it's going to burn. So we only want to burn as much fuel as we need to in order to get up to 2,000 millibuckets. We'll have all 3 of these rods at 70%, and then these 2 are at 80% so far. So now we're at 2,000. So we're potentially producing more than 2,000, just probably slightly more than 2,000 millibuckets per tick. But our turbine can only receive 2,000 millibuckets per tick, and now you can see we're all balanced out here. So we went through the green zone. That's an efficient zone. The number of RPMs, or the speed that it balances out at, is going to be based on the number of rotors and the number and type of conductor that you're using at the bottom. Now, because this particular setup, we have the 32 Ludicrite blocks and the 80 rotor blades, we're going to end up right around 1800 RPM, which is going to give us quite a bit of RF per tick, as we will see very, 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 very soon. So we're using like maybe 25% of the fuel we were using before, and we're producing actually about the same amount of RF, if I remember correctly. I think it was. And then I've got a fully infused advanced power cell on here, which can pull up to 30,000 RF per tick per side. So that'll be able to pull the power out of here pretty easily. So we're in the green area now, so we could engage the coils if we want to, but I just want to let it get a little bit faster. I want to let it to get up to about 1800. Almost there. All right, so now I'm engaged. We're doing, oh my gosh, we're doing a lot more RF than we were before. In fact, we filled up our thing. We filled up our power cell with 18 million RF. Well, we were already with a couple million RF, and now our buffer's full. So right now it's going to continue running, but it's basically just wasting energy right now. It's wasting resources because the buffer is full. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to set up some kind of control to turn this thing on and off. Now, what I'm actually going to do, because so with the reactor, we had this nice redstone port that allows us to turn the reactor on and off based on different parameters. So we're saying we're going to output a redstone signal when our buffer is at a certain place, and then this one is going to turn our reactor on and off when it gets a redstone signal. That setup isn't really going to work for the turbine because the turbine does not have a redstone port. It does have a computer port though, so we could actually. I'm going to turn this off for now so that we're not wasting fuel. So what I'm going to do, and we could use computer craft or open computers to control this thing and to get information if we want to really, really fine tune it, although that can get pretty complicated. I did it in another episode. If you want to check that out in my FTB Infinity series, I did that. I'm going to take a much simpler approach this time. I'm just leaving the turbine on all the time. And I'm leaving the blades engaged, or the rotors engaged all the time. And we're just going to turn this thing on when we need a lot of freaking RF, and we're going to make sure that we let it run for a really long time. That way it'll get up to full speed, it'll run for a while, it'll generate a bunch of RF, and then when we turn this guy off, it'll just stop producing steam, and eventually it'll slow down. But even now, it's still generating RF. Even though it doesn't have speed, the rotors still have momentum. So it's going to continue generating RF, and gradually that number is going to go down and down and down and down and down. So here's what I'm going to do. I've got two RF monitors set up here next to this advanced power cell. One of them is going to output a signal when, let's say, we're at like 50%. When we are less than 50%. This one is going to output when we are above, when we are above 80%. So that way that'll still give us 20% more, so that as this thing is cooling down or spinning down, it'll be producing RF, and it'll probably fill up the rest of the power cell. When we set up our reactor, we set up this little latch here, which basically turns our reactor on and off based on our power level. It's basically a memory circuit. What we're going to do is, let's see, channel 2 means we need power. So we have these RF monitors here. This one is outputting a signal when we have less than 50%, so that means we need power. So channel 2 is going to be set there. And then channel 3 is going to be set here, where we're outputting a redstone signal when we have more than 80%, meaning we have plenty of power. So this is basically going to mean that when we have plenty of power, or when we need power, so like this thing is down to, 18 million RF. So when we're down to 9 million RF, this thing's going to turn on, and it's going to send a redstone signal to our redstone transmitter. It's also going to basically turn this torch off and allow this one to be on. So when we get above 50% power, So when we get up to like 51%, this thing will stop outputting a redstone signal. But because this torch is here, it's going to stay on until this guy receives a redstone signal. So once we get up to 80%, this guy is going to output a redstone signal, which will turn this torch off, which will cause this circuit to basically turn off the reactor until we're down to 50% again. So that way, our turbine will only run when we need a lot of power, and then it will continue to run until we have 80% power, and then the last 20%, it will probably get filled up as it's spinning down. We'll probably increase our buffer too, because we're just so that this guy can run for longer and be more efficient. By the way, we actually could have used XNet here as well, because the advanced connectors from XNet do have a 5,000 millibucket throughput. So that would have been another option, and we already had this XNet system here, so it would have been pretty easy to do. But these super laminar ones work pretty well too, and they're kind of like, they're independent of everything else, so that's kind of nice. So I'm probably going to build 2 or 3 more turbines in the future as we expand here, and we're going to be able to produce quite a bit of power here. So as you saw, like, we could probably get up to 100,000 RF per tick. We could probably get. So I hope you enjoyed this. If you do have any questions or comments or ideas, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. And I hope you join me next time when we are, I'm not exactly sure what we're going to do yet, but we are going to be moving toward Draconic Evolution in the near future. So that's one of the reasons that I wanted to be producing a lot of power. And we're also going to be looking at expanding our power storage considerably too. I mean, I guess we could just continue to do that with the RF Tools power cells that we've been using. Yeah, we'll see. So I hope you join me for that. If you did enjoy this, don't forget to click the like button and join me next time. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.